So welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. Today, I'm joined by Tom Morley, the rock star activator, founder and well-known global drummer of the Scritti Politti group. I'm really delighted that Tom's joined us here again, and it's great to catch up with Tom after 1 or 2 years. It's going to be a fascinating episode. I'm really delighted you're here, Tom. So for people that maybe don't know as much about your story as I do, could you maybe tell us a little bit about your journey, where it all started? You know, the Scritti Politti backstory is unbelievable. The stories that you're publishing online are unbelievable. They're just fantastic. And maybe bring us up to today where you're working with teams and you're a keynote speaker in your own right. Thanks, Tom.
I'm going to start in reverse order just because it's easier for me. So right now, today, I've been talking to a client I'm working with on Monday in London, and I've told them to get me a headset mic. Very often they say, we've only got a lapel mic. And I say, I need a headset. Why do you need a headset? It's because on a headset or a Madonna mic or TED Talk mic, you can hear everything, right? And it's become really important now these days when authenticity is at a premium, that people get that, they get all of that authenticity, because I've got a drum kit here, right? So I could be hitting things quite loud and they'd get the loud message, but they need to hear me when they first see me and they think they need to hear me say, is anybody else having a bad hair day? Because that then gives them permission to sort of connect with me, other than go, oh no, they've got this freak. Why didn't we just stick to PowerPoint and talk about it rather than have to do it experientially? Because people are scared of experiential stuff. Now, how did I link that drumming, which is an electronic drum kit, but it's, you know, then in Scritti I had a acoustic drum kit. How do I link that to what I did now? Because we were doing a gig in Berlin, and it was all going well. We'd just come out of the sort of indie movement, and we were moving more towards the mainstream. It was going great, and but then there was a power cut. They often had that in those days, which would be the early 80s, especially abroad. We didn't have them a lot here, but they in Germany and Belgium, not so much France, but that kind of side of Europe, they converted things like old water treatment plants, or it was kind of beyond warehouses. It was these weird venues they had. So it's one of them. So we weren't that surprised when the power went down, but we had a choice. Now, we could have written a stiff letter to the organizers in German, and we'd have had to get someone that, you know, we couldn't have done it in Chat GPT. We'd have had to do it. So so we had that option, say, well, we didn't expect this, and we will never return to work with your organization. We were quite stroppy. However, I just carried on drumming. I thought, we don't need electricity, we don't need lights, we don't need anything. I'll just keep the beat, and then when they sort it out, we'll come back in. Now, something happened which I didn't plan for. Nobody could have planned for. The started singing Bob Marley's yo, 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 yo. So I started joining in with them with one side of that. Getting it, I was already playing a sort of reggae beat anyway, but I just customized it to them. And then probably only about 3 minutes later, all the lights came up, power on, Green was there, Neil was there. Green immediately just came in with a chop, you know, the top. Neil worked out some bass thing. And people said, and there's mass applause. People said to me at the bar afterwards, do you always do that power cut trick at your gigs? Because it works really well in bringing the audience together. So
I love that, Tom. That's brilliant.
So what, 20, I don't know, 30 years, I don't know how many years later that would have been. Yeah, probably 20 years later, I'm doing it with corporate groups. And I'll tell you one other thing about this, which is why I can't tell you in a linear fashion my story, because it never occurs to me as a linear fashion. But when I was 16, when I was 16, 1970, yeah, 16, I hitchhiked to the Isle of Wight Festival to see Jimi Hendrix. I thought I'd gone to see Jimi Hendrix. I did, you know, yeah, he was great. But the person who affected me most was John Sebastian from the Loving Spoonful, because he just came on stage, acoustic guitar, microphone, tie-dyed sort of outfit, kind of white denim tie-dyed. He was obviously, you know, he was sort of spliffed up, but he's a very good communicator, John Sebastian. So he would do this thing, and I've never forgotten this. Other rock groups came on before him, and they were going, come on, sing along with the chorus. I can't hear you, you know. And then we'd all sing a bit louder. Might be free or something. We're all right now. And then they go, I can't hear you. And after a while, when you're in the audience, you've been camping in a field, you've been rained on, you know, you've been cooking over a bonfire. There was no catering at the Isle of Wight Festival. We all just cooked on bonfire. After a while, the people shouting, I can't hear you, when they just got out their freaking helicopter, you think, well, we're singing as loud as we can, mate. You know, if you can't hear us, get your ears cleaned out. But John Sebastian would just go, okay, so why don't you join me? And he'd go, Nashville Cats. Nashville. So he'd just he'd move away from the mic. He only had one mic anyway. So we knew if we wanted to hear the song, we had to sing it. And he was doing it as a kind of joke. And one thing that, and it really worked, you know, engaged all of us, you know, and we were looking at each other. Yeah, we're creating the song here rather than, oh, no, you know. So that, again, it kind of feeds into give it to the people, to complete it, because you'll know in Gestalt psychology, it's like the Apple logo. You know, you see the apple, you see the leaf on the top, you see the bite out of it. And what everybody's thinking is, if I took that leaf, would it fit in exactly into the bite? You know, so it's called the act of closure. So in Gestalt, it's all about closure. You do the act of closure. So that's what we did in Berlin. That's what John Sebastian did at the Isle of Wight. And that's what I do with corporate groups when I'm playing. I get them all playing, and they're playing with me, and I'm mic'd up, and then I just step away from the mic. And I go, it's yours. Sometimes I even leave the room. I leave the stage. And at that point, they don't stop. They go, oh dear, it's all up to us. And then they get even better. They don't get worse because I've left and I was holding a beat. They suddenly they take ownership of the beat. They do that act of closure themselves. So
the point I would make on that is, for anybody who isn't familiar with how you engage audiences at live events, it's a joy to behold. And if you've experienced that firsthand, it's incredible. So do check out Tom's online videos. There's a few of them with him in there. And of course, you'll get all the Scritti Politti videos will pop up as well, I'm sure, when you start looking for Tom's name online. But what you're doing with brands and engaging audiences and engaging people, it really works in that environment. I suppose the other part of the question that we haven't got to was about maybe the earlier days with Scritti Politti and, you know, touring the world and that kind of, I suppose, some of those wonderful stories that you're sharing online at the moment, that you're posting, that you're writing.
Yeah, with Scritti, we formed an art school in, I can tell you this chronologically, we formed an art school in the late 70s. I met Green really early in Freshers Week. We didn't go to any Freshers events, but we met in the bar, and we just kind of got on. I don't know why, because he'd come from Wales and he had a middle-class background. I come from, you know, some sleepy suburb of Brighton, working class background. Oh, but we'd both gone maybe this was it. We'd both gone to Leeds to get as far away from home as possible. Not that we were particularly unhappy at home, but we just, you know what it's like when you're young. You think, yeah, come on, I want to see the world. You know, so I went as far up the M1 as I could when it ended at Leeds. And also, we both chose that course because at the time, it was the freest course in the country. You were meant to do a foundation year, try a bit of everything, and go, right, I'm going to be a screen printer. Right, I'm going to be a performance artist. Right, and then you'd apply to the college that did the best screen printing, or that was most geared up for performance. Now, Leeds Polytechnic, as it was then, was geared up for everything, because and actually this is only occurring to me right now. It was geared up for everything because it also, as a polytechnic, it catered for people who just wanted to learn skills. So consequently, you could do wallpaper, not design, but you could do, there was rooms where people would just go and learn to wallpaper, to be painters and decorators and graphic designers. So all the printing, all the craft stuff was in there, as well as all the fine art stuff. And it was like just this big airplane hangar. It was the whole lower floor of the Polytechnic, which was this big grey industrial block, right? It's almost no, to call it Bauhaus would be complimentary. It was a 60s monstrosity. So we were in there, and then there was the university where the Gang of Four were getting themselves together, and the Mekons and stuff, and they were over. There was a motorway between us, a sunken motorway, which was very symbolic because it looked like ivory towers, you know. So people always say about the Leeds scene, there was a pub in the middle, it's called the Fenton. People always used to say, and in fact, I was invited up there to talk about it by a film crew. And they said, we did it in the Fenton. They said, so you all used to get together and talk about music, did you? And politics and the Clash and Malcolm McLaren and the Anarchy Tour. Must have been amazing. And I said, yeah, well, the Gang of Four used to sit over there in that corner. They didn't talk to us. The Mekons knew the Gang of Four a little bit. Mark Arman used to come in, but he just kept himself to himself. And at that point, Mark Arman had this huge, it wasn't an afro, it was curly hair like Harpo Marx, right? These golden curls. And he used to paint these pictures of himself as a clown with this golden glow all around him. So there was no, it was a hotbed of politics and invention and creation, but we all did it singly, you know, pretty much. You know, we would talk to each other at the bar if we happened to meet each other, but it'd be more like I was here first, mate, you know, so it'd be more like that rather than.
That's really interesting, Tom. Yeah.
So I know Gavin Butt has just written a book about it. And I did talk to Gavin for that book, and I've spoken to him since about my own book. But I haven't read it yet, so I don't know if he portrayed it that way, that we're all there, creating the revolution. It wasn't. It was like, I mean, you'll know in the Spanish Civil War, you think communists against fascists, but all the different communist factions, I think they added up at the end of the war. The amount of ammunition they fired at their own side and the amount of ammunition they fired at the fascists, and it was more. The infighting was more. So anyway, that's an aside. So Green and I, we were artists along with other artists, and then when the Anarchy Tour came along and the Clash and people, we were very left wing anyway. So we said, what are we doing? We're just making art for the bourgeoisie. We used these words in those days, for the bourgeoisie to increase their spiritual status in the world and create an even bigger division between them and the working class. So we'll give up art and we'll form a band. Now, Green had already played in a band in Wales, guitar and singing. I'd only ever played bongos at a party before and noticed that I had a bit of a beat. And my dad, being a working class, I call him, I mean, he was addicted to Dexedrine after the war, and he stayed addicted. Consequently, his brain for paperwork was terrible. He would never fill in my grant forms. I got a full grant, but he'd always fill them in late. And this particular month, he didn't fill them in at all. So right at the end of our term, when we said, let's form a band, I suddenly got this big wedge of money saying, here's all the money we should have given you for this term. So I went downtown and bought a drum kit, which I couldn't play. I played it for about a week, and then I just put all the other drums in the corner, and I sat at the snare drum for a month, just learning to play it. And I went to the music college down the road, and I got snare drum lessons. And when I could get everything right on the snare drum that I wanted to, I gradually introduced the drum at time. I said, right, now I'm going to do snare and bass, right? And because you have to develop this autonomy of limbs, they call it. But I wasn't that good. I knew what I wanted to do, but I'll do this another time with the drum kit. I'd be like, all right, snare, and then, oh, I need hi-hat. Oh, cymbal, ding, bass drum. And there's a particular song, I think it's called OPEC IMAC, that we did on the Peel session. And I remember reading this write-up of it, and this journalist said, oh, Tommy's obviously listened to a lot of jazz drummers, particularly, and he said the name of this drummer. He said, because he's so sparse in the way he plays, the way, he leaves such space for us all to kind of feel the beat. And all it was that I could not play the kit when we did that. I just had to play a drum at a time, right? But I could still keep the pulse. That was the thing. So it wasn't like I was letting the music down. It's just I was kind of letting it down in terms of standard autonomy of limbs, because later on, the hardest rhythm I ever learned was Lust for Life. Because it's the feel of the ride cymbal. It's like I don't know, it's a lesson in rhythm all on its own. So you've got to get that right, and then you just got to back it up with the sort of machine gun sort of mechanics of the bass drum and the snare. So you've got to do that. So I learned later from that guy Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote the book Flow. He said flow is found at the intersection of discipline and surrender. So you have to have all the discipline to be a drummer, like me and the snare drum, introducing things. And then when you get on stage, you have to have the surrender, because any musician will say that, it's especially attributed to jazz musicians, that if you see the way they pass solos around, they surrender at different times, and the rest of the group is the discipline. They don't all surrender all together, or they wouldn't. I mean, they might say they do that, actually. Some people, some groups, but I've found that you've got to have someone being the discipline, and that's often my role in a band, in a session, because in a corporate session, that's what I do. I'm the discipline. They can surrender. If they all just surrendered, it would be chaos. It would be like what they expect it's going to be. So discipline, surrender. And I've added something to that, because Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's formula is a little bit too scientific for me. So I made it visual. I said the groove is found at the crossroads of Discipline Street and Surrender Avenue, and you'll find me at the Mischief Bar. Now, I wanted to add mischief into that, because that's what you need. That is, and there's a book called Kate Fox called Watching English. Have you read that book? Some of your people know it, I know, because she's an anthropologist, and she looked at the English particularly with an anthropologist's eyes, like she would study a tribe and say, oh, they eat in this way and they have these rituals. So she looked at us in that way and she said, why is it that English people, they think they have such a great sense of humor, and we have a reputation abroad for having a good sense of humor? Why? And she said, well, I'll tell you why. It's because as an anthropologist, if you go to Japan, there'll be certain times in the day for a Japanese person or a team or that when they're allowed to make jokes, right? Certain things, definitely no humor. Same with the French, same with the Germans, same with the English. It's 24 hours a day. You know, from the moment you're born, you're allowed to make jokes till the day you die, and very often they're quite mischievous. So it's in our culture to be mischievous. And who are the most interesting? I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I'm sure there's some mischievous characters. I know there's, you know, Loki, of course, got his own show because in Norse mythology, he's the mischievous one. So we like mischief. We like, you know, why are heist movies so attractive to us? Well, you know, Ocean's 11 is one of my favorite movies ever. Why? There's so much mischief in it. Even amongst themselves, they're tricking each other to get the best performance out of each other. So it's yeah, so discipline, surrender, and mischief. I don't know what to call my book, but that's got to be somewhere on the cover.
I think that's close to the top of the list. Yeah,
hadn't it? It's got to be, because that would be the red thread. If you look at all the things I've done, they've all got an element of mischief in there, and they've all got an element of discipline, and they've all.
So Tom, let me ask you then, because I mean, I didn't know that part about the grant coming through and having the, you know, all of a sudden, well, let's form a band, and then like as if by magic, the grant money suddenly comes through. And you say, I'll buy a drum kit. But to that point, you'd only ever played the bongos. You hadn't had a drum kit before. You hadn't sat down with the, you know, the sticks and you learned it all sort of piece by piece. So how do you go from that to the, I suppose, the international stardom that you did have, the success, the highs? Like, what was the turning point when you look back? Was there anything that you could hang your hat on and go, it was that? I remember something was changing when we felt this, or was it just a gradual change?
Well, I mean, we did everything wrong. We did everything you shouldn't have done. So when we took our first recordings to Rough Trade, and in our plan, that was the thing, right? Okay, so we'll make this music that we started in Leeds. We'll go and get a place in London. Some friends of ours, the year before at art school, have moved to Carroll Street, which was all squatted houses. And one had just become available when we wanted to go down there. It's quite a long story, but anyway, we nabbed it. There was a lot of competition for it, but we got in there quickly through me getting through the back window as soon as the woman left. This is an old lady leaving who's been rehoused in this beautiful block nearby. So I got in, you know, within minutes. Right, great, changed the locks, and then she came back. She got a cab back, and she was at the front door trying to get in, right? And eventually I had to open the door, and she said, I'll come back from my lamp. I left my reading lamp. I said, oh, I'll get it for you. But then she said, what are you doing in my house? I said, well, we're a band. We need someone to live. And then she said, but I've paid the rent until Monday. This was on a Saturday. Said, I've paid the rent until Monday. You have to leave. You can't, you know, there was obviously, she was quite rightly emotionally attached to her house. And within 15 minutes of leaving, she's got these bloody squatters in there. You know? They would have only, it's what they used to call the metal curtains. They'd have only put up corrugated iron on the front and locked it up because the council wanted to demolish the street. That's what they wanted. So consequently, I had to go and, no, actually, I had to get the van back because I'd borrowed the van. I had all that stuff in the van. We had to unload it all into our friend's house. I had to drive the van back to Leeds, and Green had to sort of hover at their window for 2 days for the weekend. He hated it, right? It was so sort of on the edge, and he was saying, "You've got to stay, I can't do this on my own." And I was going, "I've got to get I promised to get the van back." I borrowed it from a free school. It was this huge comma van. It was like a shoebox on wheels. It was so unstable. Anyway, we put it all in our friend's room, and then I came back and did the same thing on early Monday morning. Got through the back window, did it, changed the locks. So what was that connected to? Oh, it's somebody doing everything wrong. Yeah, so we went to Rough Trade. We fitted out one of those rooms as a rehearsal room. We used to go around skips and get all old carpet and stuff and bang it on the wall. And and then Rough Trade said, well, yeah, Jeff Travis, he said, yeah, I kind of like it, but it's not really for us, good luck, guys. But they were the only company we were interested in. And so we thought, well, and Green was devastated. He said, but that, what do we do now if they don't like us? And I remember this. There was a conversation at the bus stop, and I said, well, I still think we're the greatest band in the world, which I did. And he said, oh, if you do, all right, well, let's put it out on our own. Let's talk to some people about DIY records, because that was the time. There's groups like the Desperate Bicycles and people have made their own records. So we went to visit the Desperate Bicycles. They told us names of pressing plants, where we could get rubber stamps done. They were great. They're really lovely people. They were kind of hippies. It was a bit tetchy because we were pretending to be punks, right? We weren't meant to like hippies, and there's these hippies lovingly giving us all this information about how to be good indie people, dissing hippiness, even though we'd all been hippies. We had to keep it quiet. So then we went to in order to get to the pressing plant, we had to get an acetate cut. So we went to a place that was near the BBC. It's called Porky Prime Cut. It's where you took your tape, they put it on a big machine, they boosted anything they thought needed boosting, reduced anything, and then they gave you an acetate. This guy, he used to be called Porky because he was a bit big, and but he was proud of it, and so he'd write. If you look at records from that time, it will say Porky Prime Cut in the center because he'd write it in the acetate with this tiny little scalpel almost. Some of the Raincoats records as well. Everyone used to go there. So we had 2 acetates, and one had a bit more bass on it, and one was just the straight cut as we recorded it. So we wanted to take the more bassy one to the pressing plant. So we said, well, look, there's BBC. Let's just drop it in at reception. And BBC reception then, it was like going to a theatre or something. It's like there's just someone at a desk, in this little door. And there's this guy with a sort of hat on, like the sort of person you'd see at an art gallery, just stands there all day, look, just checking nothing's going wrong. And so we spoke to him and we said, hello, would you give this to John Peel when he comes in, please? And he said, oh, well, I'll give it to John Waters, his producer. Who are you? And we said, well, we are the band Scritti Politti. All right, Scritti Politti. So, because we didn't know, we didn't know if we were going to be a band or not, really. So that night we were at the pub, the Engineer, and we took a transistor radio with us, and we said, oh, it's John Peel's on 10 o'clock. Let's just have a listen. And he said, yeah, good evening, everyone. This evening I'm going to play you Clash. I've got a new one from Susie and the Banshees and Scritti Politti. And we said, what? He said our name on it. Not only that, he played all the tracks on that acetate. There's 3. And he said, yeah, if you're listening, guys, give us a call. And we'll fix up for you to come in and do a session for us. Now, doing the John Peel session was hard. You know, it's hard to get one of those. We didn't even have a record. He hadn't been at any of our gigs. He didn't know anything about us, but there was something about that he just said, oh, this is, yeah, right. It's very interesting, guys. You know, come on in, which is what we did. So, and then we were the first to take that session and make a record out of it. We bought the tapes off them. Nobody else had ever done that. So when I say we did everything wrong, wrong is probably the wrong word. We did everything
different.
Yeah.
Tom, that is an amazing story. That is just unbelievable.
I haven't told that to anyone. You're the first, actually.
That is an incredible story. Incredible. That you know, from the grant money to the drum set, to the learning to play, to the well, they won't take us, so we'll go and we'll ask these other guys, how do we make a record, like physically make a record?
Yeah.
And then we'll hand it to some guy at the BBC who might hand it to some guy who might listen to it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were putting money on it, you'd say that's never going to work as a strategy. And that very night, John Peel's going, hey, listen to these guys.
Yeah. That night. Yeah. I mean, I'm getting goose pimples just thinking about it because, of course, because it's my story, I think, oh, yeah, that's the way it happened. But if you hear it, I mean, there's so many things that could have not clicked in there, aren't there? You know, the guy on the door at the BBC could have been in a bad mood, or it being an acetate, he could have dropped it, put it on the shelf, and it would have broken because it was like an old 78 record. You know, it's not, it wasn't plastic.
And it was that first session that John called you in for.
Yeah.
That you actually bought the recordings from them.
Yeah. Yeah. It didn't cost us that much, but because in those days, recording studio, it was a faff, you know. And we said, well, we've done it, you know, we like the results. Why say? Because yeah, that's right. You have to do it fairly quickly. But because we'd actually played, we haven't played many gigs, but we'd rehearsed a lot. We used to rehearse every day. So consequently, when we came to play in the studio and they just stuck mics everywhere, they didn't really separate us. We said, but that's what we do. You know, that's the best we can do. Stick us in the studio with some producer. We're not going to do any better than that because he's going to separate us. And then we're not going to have the chemistry between us when we play. And so
it's very similar. I mean, there are some similarities between the other story you were sharing where, you know, the power goes out in Germany.
Yeah.
And you just keep it going. Like it's kind of like, it's a bit unorthodox. And then some guy at the bar later says, oh, I love where you do that bit where you turn the power off.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some sort of unique ways, different ways that you went about it. And I love, like, there's not many people, if I say to them, you know, how did it happen, that will say, do you know what, we did it wrong. We kind of did it very differently. We didn't follow the norm. And I think you're still doing that today, Tom. You know, you're very creative. You're a very influential rock star activator.
Can I tell you one more story about that? And it's a corporate one, because I mean, it's lovely you're saying this because it confirms in me what I do. When we lived in Fulham, this was 20 years ago. I was looking out the window. We lived by the river in this sort of flat, and we didn't really know the neighbours that well. We haven't been there that long, but I did know the girl's name. She was, excuse me, playing in the garden, called Elena, and she was looking really sad. And I liked this girl because I could recognise in her she was quite shy. You know, I was shy as a kid, so I went out and I had my drum, and I said, Elena, can I play you a song? An African song with your name in it. Now we'd learned this African song called Imela. Imela, 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 Chuku Imela. It's beautiful, kind of when you harmonize it. And so I was going, Elena, Elena, and I was keeping this beat going. And her dad came out, and he worked for a small publishing company called Pegasus, and we just got chatting. Oh no, at that point, he worked for the Independent on Sunday. And I thought, oh, maybe I can get a gig out of this, because I'd used the Independent on Sunday as a rhythm in workshops sometimes to teach people, because you can go, and if you get a whole crowd doing that, it sounds like the Burundi drummers, you know, if you bring it in different places in the bar, it's amazing. So he said, yeah, that he said the Independent, but we're too conservative, we'd never go for it. But my mate runs this publishing company called Pegasus. He might be interested in the team building thing. And I thought, I looked him up online, Pegasus, tiny company. I thought, well, that's no good. Anyway, I was kind of hooked in at that point. I said, yeah, of course, I'll go and do it. It's no money, but he said, you might get something out of it, you know. So I went and did it. It's only 15 people. They absolutely loved it. Forgot about it. 15, let me think, what was it? No, it's about 3 months later, the phone started ringing off the hook. Will you come and do team building drumming for it? Will you come and do team building? I was going, what? I said to them, what's happened? Something's happened. And that guy from Pegasus, he had written a piece of editorial in BA, would you believe this? BA's In-Flight magazine, right? So I had this captive audience across the Atlantic reading about me, and they've done this illustration, not of me, but a businessman with a headband and shakers and stuff. It's great and very, very genuine. He said people were meeting, he said people in this company, they're saying, what is it about you people who were at that drumming session? You all seem so sort of happy and connected, you know, you're chatting to each other in the lift. They said that doesn't happen in this organization. What's happened? So he wrote about that. And one of the companies was GSK, and they said, would he come and see us? So we're driving up there, and I said, I'm going to look up something about them. And they got this credo, GSK credo, and they also had it in the foyer. So in the meeting, I mentioned some of those things from their credo, and they go, nobody's ever even read our credo before, let alone build it into their pitch. So this guy, and I was wearing a coat a bit like this, and he told me later, Paul Cullerton, we got to know each other well. He said, you know, when he turned up, when I called down, are you there yet? And the receptionist said, yeah, Harry Potter's in the foyer waiting to see us.
That's brilliant.
We were. He said, "Would he come and do a thing for our team in Vienna at the Hotel Sacher, which is the best hotel in Vienna, right? So all these global leaders of GSK." And so, it went really well. Only 20 of them, and individually, they all came up to me at the bar, almost conspiratorially, you know, in that mischief way, and said, would you come to Moscow and do this? I'd love to do this, but don't tell the others. Would you come to Istanbul and do this? So consequently, oh, do you know what? I said GSK, it was Johnson & Johnson, J&J, because there was a song that I learned in South Africa called Sing J and J and J. Sing J and J and J, get my tanda. So I used to sing that to them, and I told them that some of the money that you're paying us is going to the family that I learned that song from, because I said I'd build them a house in exchange for the song. So we built this great house in this township that's really a ghetto. And then other people heard that story and they said, oh, really? We want to build a house. So we ended up creating this charity called, it's Amatuba. It means building opportunities. They had this strap line, building opportunities, Amatuba. And the guys who built the houses then learned the skills as they went along, and they set up their own little building company. They bought a van, and they now do sort of the white suburbs, doing patios and stuff. So that came out. So then when I did that for about 2 years. I was going all around the world with these people. And when I got back, I was talking to a mate of mine, also in the kind of team building business. And he said, Tom, how did you, he said, I've employed all sorts of PR people, all sorts of marketing. How did you get that editorial in BA's In-Flight magazine? I said, well, you know, I just sang a song to a girl who looked a bit unhappy. That's it.
Beautiful, Tom. It's
Go figure,
incredible.
as they say. So I just keep living like this. People always saying, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? That's not going to lead to, that's not. You need to become a LinkedIn strategist, you know, post every day at the same time. Talk about what's going on. If it's Christmas, do a post about Christmas. It's all nonsense. All that stuff, to me, it's nonsense. Maybe it works for other people. It's just a judgment for me to say it's nonsense. But I am not going to do that. I cannot. It's physically.
I think you have a different makeup and a different path through life, Tom. And
yeah,
it's working because the stories that you have are incredible, and the career that you have, the journey that you're on, it's phenomenal. You know, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, you know, the sooner Netflix or somebody picks you up for a series, or the sooner your book gets published, the better, because there are some tales and stories that they're just hard to, I mean, they're hard to fathom. They're incredible stories. So thank you for sharing those wonderful examples. Before I run out of time with you, though, I need to ask you a few other things, if that's okay.
Sure.
Now, when you think over the career that you've had and the inspirations that you had, there must have been people that you admired along the way. Whether it was guys you were kind of half ignoring in a bar in Leeds, or whether it was people in sort of business life, you know, flying around the world doing team building, or it could be just from somebody from your childhood. But who's inspired you along the way? When I ask you that question, who jumps into your mind as people that you admire or that you look up to?
Well, the first person that jumps into my mind, and she has done ever since I heard about it, is Rosa Parks, because she, in a very small action that anybody could have done, sparked the whole civil rights movement in America by not going to the back of the bus. You know, you must know the story. The buses were segregated. White people sat at the front, black people sat at the back, and there was a division. And even if they were sitting at the back and a white person got on and there was no seat for them at the front, a black person would have to stand up to give a seat to, and they'd move the division. Now, by the simple act of saying, no, I'm tired. The bus was pretty much empty anyway. I'm not going to go to the back of the bus. So they got the police. She was arrested. And it was like, similar to Emmeline Pankhurst throwing herself in front of the King's Hall. It's going, everybody knows about it, and then bang, there's that one thing where people go, no, this can't go on. So I'm always looking for my version of not going to the back of the bus. It doesn't have to be, I'm not Che Guevara. I'm not going to organize a whole freaking troop of people to land in the Bay of Pigs. I am an event organizer, but I'm not a revolutionary in that way. But Rosa Parks was a revolutionary in her own way. She found that point. I mean, she wasn't even trying to do that. She was just standing up for herself. So so anyone who does that sort of thing in the world, they're my, and the second person, when you ask that question, actually was my art teacher at school, because I'd been through quite a hard time. My mum had died. Nobody knew at school, or she knew, but nobody in those days. I was 13, so that would have been 1954, 1967. There was no counselling. Everyone was just embarrassed. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Very few people knew. She knew, and I'd go into the art class. I was in the sixth form at that point, and she'd say to all of us, not just me. I mean, she did this to everybody, but I think she paid some special attention to me. She'd say, "Okay, Tom. So what are we doing today? Do you want to carry on with that collage you were doing, or do you want to do something completely different? I've just got this new paper in. You may want to try doing something on that, and she'd really look after me. And then she'd come round. There was me, and there was there was a gang of us. There was 4 of us. We were the sort of hippies of the class, the freaks. And she knew we were all smoking dope and behind the bike sheds and everything. But she was cool, right? So she just had this enthusiasm about her that reminded me. I'll tell you one other person, my gran, he said the Second World War was the best of times and the worst of times, because they all used to look after each other all the time. She was in the Blitz in London. And I've told this story many times, but I'll tell you briefly. She said when the bombs were falling in the Blitz, they used to go into the underground, and the children were anxious. They couldn't sleep. So they used to sing to them. And I'd say, what? The singers used to sing? No, we'd all just sing. And I'd go, well, the singers and the actors and performers, they'd sing. No, we all used to sing, because if you heard your parents singing, then you'd think, oh, everything's all right. And then they'd harmonize. All the people who could sing would harmonize, right? So that's this beautiful thing going on every night in her particular tube, anyway, that she went to. Her mum was a singer, played piano in the local pub. So these kind of everyday heroes, and the reason that they're all everyday heroes to me are because they had a choice. They had a choice to say, oh, no, we've got to do 3 months of singing lessons before we can possibly sing. You know, Rosa Parks could have gone, I don't want any trouble. I'll just go to the back of the bus. You know, we all just, and how that links in my behaviour is, well, there's the BBC. Well, let's just go and hand it in. Something might happen, something might not. We weren't out to start a DIY revolution. We just wanted to hear our song on the radio because we're proud of it. And it did. Wonderful. You know, people used to come around the house and say, we want to make our own record. Can you tell us? And we used to take them down the pub, tell them, just like Desperate Bicycles told us, you know. So
they're wonderful examples, Tom. Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing those. Really
You're welcome.
Those. You're welcome. The other thing I wanted to ask you as well is, so that's kind of people that you admire and why you admire them. Three great examples there. But what about advice? So you just touched on it there a little bit, because you said people would knock your door and say, hey, how do I do this DIY movement? How do I, and you take them down the pub and show them, you know, tell them what to do. But has there been advice that stuck with you, whether it's since you were a young child, throughout your the rise of the music industry that you were involved in, or through what you're doing maybe more today in terms of events and speaking?
Yeah.
Is there some advice that really stuck with you that you think is really important, or do you find yourself sharing a particular piece of advice to people that you really want to impart to our audience?
Okay. Do you know what? It's a great question. I can't think of one person. But what was occurring to me when you were saying that?
Yeah.
Were these 2 words: serenading serendipity, chanting to chance, and rolling with the rhythm. Now, they came to me. I've been through some really dark time, you know, very, very deep depressions, a year long sometimes. And there's one time when my wife, I couldn't stand sound. It's weird for a musician. I couldn't stand the noise of the traffic or anything. She took me to an island off Kenya, off the Kenyan coast, called Lamu, but there's no traffic, no cars allowed. And she left me. We were pretty much together most of the time, but she said, look, you're safe on this balcony, the sun's going. And she said, I'm just going to let you, I see you're resisting going so low, you'll never come back. But she said, we have to let that happen. I'm just going to leave you. I'm going into town, going to leave you to drop. You're lying down, you're safe. And I dropped and I dropped and I dropped and I dropped. And then I did actually hit rock bottom. There is something physical, that there is a bass. And in that bass, there were 2 words. There was harmony and rhythm. That's it. Everything else had gone. Everything I'd done, achieved every piece of this or that, every relationship, gone, 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 gone. So when I came back, I surfaced gradually. I mean, the story of how I surfaced is in the book. It was over months. But I thought, well, I don't need it. You know, I was still alive. I just got these 2 words. What shall I build around them? I don't have to have anything. I don't have to have a tax return. You know, actually, I do have to have a tax return. But you know what I mean? It's not a priority. What can I do with harmony and rhythm? And that, you know, it really brought me to, I was already doing the work I do now, but it brought me back in a different way. And people say to me, they say, we saw you on stage at the beginning of our conference, and we just hated you. 200 of us. Why do we have to go through this bleeding team building every year? And they said, but you had this kind of glow around you, and you had such a belief that we were going to do it, that we just kind of went along with it. And then it worked, didn't it? Like, how did you know it's going to work? And it comes from that place, harmony, rhythm, because I see it everywhere in the world. So I guess my advice would be, allow yourself to be stripped of all the advice, all the emotion you've got tied up in your brand. Whatever it is you're doing, allow yourself. Sometime you don't have to get depressed. You could just go and lie on the South Downs or something, or lie in a bath, go to a spa. Allow all that stuff to fall away and see what's there. And there will be something. It won't be harmony and rhythm. It may be, I don't know what it could, you know, it could just be authentic leadership, or, you know, it'll be something. Oh, that's what I'm about. I'm about authentic leadership. How do I take that to the world? And then energetically, because it's so simple, you will just collect. It will be like going around the supermarket and going, no, no, no. Oh, yeah, I'll have some of that. No, no, no. Oh, I'll have some of that. It's like, and anyone who's been on any sort of diet, especially when you're cutting out sugar, will know 90% of things in the supermarket you cannot put in that basket. They're all good. So it's like a version of that. It's like giving up sugar, but you give up all the nonsense that you're told. You have to do it this way. You have to do it that way. Yeah. The shelves are full of, you have to do it this way. No, I'm just going to have that. Thank you very much. And you get to the checkout, and people go, people don't normally buy these. Where did you find them? Well, I found them. Yeah, I found them.
It's great advice, and thank you for sharing that, Tom. It's really good. The last couple of things before we wrap up today, I want to squeeze them in if I can. At the time of recording this, we've got another year ahead. We're looking at new plans. You yourself have plans and ideas, and you're constantly evolving. What's taking up your mental capacity at the moment? What are you thinking about when you think about 6 months, 12 months, or are you just living in the moment and serendipity? And how does that work for you, Tom?
I'm lucky enough to have been doing some work with Jamie Wheel, who wrote the book Stealing Fire from the Gods and Recapture the Rapture. Jamie is one of the most advanced thinkers of our time, and he speaks in a very, he's not an academic, I mean, academically he is brilliant, but he speaks in a non-academic way. And recently, just a few days ago, I watched the thing about his new book, and his new book is about, it's not written yet, but it's about the stories we've been using in society that have now run their course, and Kurt Vonnegut mapped them, Joseph Campbell mapped them. You know, there's only a few stories in the world, or story structures. One of them is rags to riches. Now, rags to riches suited us fine for a lot of the Industrial Revolution, because that's what we saw. We saw you could start poor and you could, if I work hard enough. It's what the American dream is based on. Work hard enough. However, in the last 10 years, or at least since we've been seeing climate change in the news on a daily basis, we can't do the rags to riches story anymore. I mean, they try, but it doesn't resonate anymore. So this does answer your question, by the way. So he says, another story, which often follows rags to riches, Shakespeare used it a lot, is tragedy. So it's like you start here, and let's do it that way. You start here, but everything gradually gets worse. It goes to entropy, where some scientists would say, of course, it's always going to go to entropy. But that's too sad. And the most popular story is the Cinderella story, which is down, go to the ball, slipper, midnight, really down. Oh God, devastated. Oh, gradually, hey, slipper fits, marry the prince. So even more up than you were here. So he talks about, and it's what Martin Luther King talked about, when things have been so bad and you've been through this dread, when you come back, he said there's something called soul force. Different spiritual leaders will call it different things, but I like that MLK version, soul force. And it's like a state of grace. And it is like that serenading serendipity. You just do on a daily basis. Every moment you get a choice. It could just be, what am I going to eat for breakfast? How am I going to ignore that person, or am I going to speak to them? Am I going to help? I'm not talking about sort of random acts of kindness. It's more subtle than that. It's am I going to promote beauty now? Am I going to promote good? Am I going to breathe in this situation where everybody seems anxious? I'm not going to tell them all to calm down. I'm just going to breathe for us all. And then gradually everyone calms down. So, and he said in his previous books, there will be, we will form from all these people like Burning Man, all these different festivals, all these different communities, we will form thousands of experiments of how to live socially. And most of them will fail. They'll be very noble. Most of them will fail. Some of them will work, and we'll take those as examples of how to build the future. I was at a party on Boxing Day, and a lot of people we'd never met before. We only meet once a year at this party, right? Some of us are musicians. And I gathered the musicians, which I can do, I'm allowed to do as a drummer. And I said, and they're all going, oh, it's been a terrible year. Oh, yeah, we lost all the funding. And I said, yeah, well, that's the government. You notice how the government aren't that keen to fix it all. They're keen to talk about it, but they're not keen to fix it, because as long as we're anxious, then there'll be no revolution. So I said, but the revolution is in this room tonight. Every note we play, every harmony we create, everyone we get dancing. This is the revolution. And I tell you, if it had been on Netflix, the golden lights were because we all played so incredibly well, and it was so joyous. And some of the young people there who we'd watched grow up at that party were now teenagers, and they said, we want to sing the harmony, or we've got a song we want to do. They don't whip out the lyrics, they just get their phone and look it up. So it looks like they're checking their email, but they're just looking at the lyrics on the phone. So I think that I just want my 2023 to be full of that, and not just for me, but I'm confident now, not in an arrogant way, but I'm confident that wherever I land, if I have that in my heart, then I can create something. I don't yet say it on my website, but I say it a lot to people. I reintroduce people to their own creativity. That's what my life is all about. And I can't do that as a politician. I can't say, I'm here today to reintroduce you. I can't even say it, to reintroduce you. But if I just create the environment where they feel free, to be creative. The teenagers say, we want to sing in harmony. They go, yeah, come on up. we'll wait for you till you sorted your lyrics out, you know. So that's what I do. So
love that, Tom. Thanks for that. That's a great way of looking at it for this year. And tell me, the last thing I want to ask you is, we talked about a lot there, and look, you and I could talk for days on end, and I'd never get bored. You know, it's just, I'm riveted to the stories. But is there anything else that's on your mind that you think you'd like to share with our worldwide audience before we wrap up today? And the second thing I want to ask you is, if people want to find out more about the book, the team building, the public speaking, everything that you're involved in, where are you sending people to? Where's the best place for people to reach out and connect with you at?
The best place, I'll do that first. The best place is to go to tommorley.com. So it's TOMMORLEY.com. You can also, if you can't remember that, but you can remember my name, you can go to Google Images and type in Tom Morley drummer, and you'll see this wallpaper of me, because I've laid every picture of me online, I label Tom Morley drummer. I don't let it go up as 3x2y JPEG, you know, and that's a tip for anybody, you know. And if you do that over years, you build a legacy that no search engine can do anything with. It's got to honor that algorithm that you know, you create over a long time. What's the other? Yeah, and you can just put in Tom Morley on Facebook. I'm on Facebook 24 hours, and I'll just come up top in any search, even though there's thousands of Tom Morleys, because again, it's just something. And I like being on Facebook. I like, you know, I've done some work with David Bowie, not on his song Sound and Vision, but Sound and Vision are very much in my personal vibe. You know, I love being able to do a picture, do some writing, and then get some feedback immediately. You know, bang it out. Like I was saying to you earlier, if I bang it out at 3 o'clock in the morning, some story, some anecdote, some remembrance, some piece of wisdom that I've got from somewhere. Someone that in Australia will go at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, oh, thanks, Tom. That's really what I needed to hear on this. I absolutely love it. I love it.
Well, look, Tom, that's a beautiful note for us to end on today. I mean, it's been great speaking to you again. It's fantastic. I'd encourage anybody to follow what Tom's doing. He's making a real difference in the world. And that brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Interview. So thank you to Tom. Thank you to everybody who's watching or listening around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do all the good things that we'd like you to do with the podcast. And I hope that you'll join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So, Tom, it's been a great pleasure to catch up with you again, my friend. Thanks so much. And we'll
been great to be here, and and thank you for helping me link it all together, because like I say, this is my life, so I just experience it as this plate of spaghetti, but it actually seems to have some order.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Talk soon, my friend.
Thanks. Take care.